I'm based here in the Huon Valley in Tasmania. I've been in the apple industry since the early 80s. Had a few different roles, from being involved just working on an orchard to several years managing a fruit tree nursery for a local company before being employed more nationally with a company set up to evaluate new apple varieties. So that's sort of my background. These days I work as a consultant in the apple business. Fruit business really around the world, so I have 3 or 4 clients that I work with, and I do it all from here in Tasmania. So part of the progression for me in the apple industry, I'm fortunate to come into this industry company called Australian Pome Fruit Improvement Program in 1997. Prior to that, I'd been working in the nursery business. I'd been fortunate enough to get a Churchill Fellowship to go overseas and look at what was happening in the world of particularly rootstocks in apples and stone fruit, which took me to this world of new varieties. And it was a very similar time to plant breeders' rights legislation coming into effect here in Australia under the 1991 version of UPOV, which sort of piqued my interest around variety protection and the proprietary variety kind of world. So in Australia we have a thing called breeder testing. There's no central testing for plant breeders' rights, so I became a qualified person under the Act to write plant breeders' rights descriptions for fruit varieties. So I started doing that in the end of the 90s, and that aligned with the development of Cripps Pink as a variety in Australia. It was already being widely planted here. The first registration of a Pink Lady trademark was in 1997, which was then owned by the Department of Agriculture in Western Australia. They owned the variety right and the trademark right. In the following year, in 1998, they assigned the trademark rights to their then industry organisation, the Australian Apple and Pear Growers Association, which later became Apple and Pear Australia Limited, which is the current owner of the Pink Lady brands. So my role was really in the new variety evaluation. My colleague John Durham was much more involved in the early development of the Pink Lady business. I came into it gradually in the early 2000s because APFIP was owned by APAL. So there was crossover in the things that I was doing in new varieties, the plant variety world and the trademark. And slowly but surely I finished up more and more engaged in the Pink Lady business. By 2006 I had quite a role in that business internationally. From 2008 onwards I was managing most of the licensing and new market development around the world. So it was quite a project, I guess, 15 different production areas. By then we had trademark registrations in at least 100 territories. The trademark registration suite was ever expanding. By the time I finished in 2017 in that role, there were more than 200 registered trademarks, thousands of licensees around the world, and quite a significant business. But it all looked like a great deal from the outside, but I often used to say that it was like walking in fresh snow. There were no footsteps to follow, so we were making it up as we went, really. There were many challenges, and there probably still are in that business. But that linked with a role in plant breeders' rights, finished up more and more into writing plant descriptions. So these days I've been involved still apples, pears, strawberries, table grapes. So apple production here in the Huon Valley at its peak in the middle of the 1960s was 165,000 tonnes, and it was the largest apple production area in the Southern Hemisphere. It was a pick, pack and ship to export markets. A whole range of factors came on the scene to take that away, and the industry in Tasmania shrunk to about 25,000 tonnes of apples. Most of that is here in the Huon Valley. There's some in the Derwent Valley and some along the Tamar and in the northwest coast, but I guess a couple of the bigger growers are here in the Huon Valley. They've diversified over the last few years into cherries, particularly cherries that are late in the market. So as we've been visiting today, and my neighbour here, Hanson Orchards, won't really start until after New Year's Day, and they're aiming to focus on providing high quality cherries into Asia in ahead of Chinese New Year ideally, with very few competitors in the market. There's an area around in central Otago in New Zealand that produces cherries at a similar time, but really the Huon Valley is the last place in the southern hemisphere producing cherries. Bird netting was the norm, but it still is, but these days without rain covers to guarantee the crop, it's probably not a viable deal. You're probably going to get rain 5 years out of 7 in the summertime. So protected horticulture here is more and more the way of the world, and as I said, Hanson Orchards basically have 100% of all of their cherries under rain covers, so they're not too worried if it rains. So they have a very clear pathway to market, and to make that work you need a crop, so protected horticulture is what it's all about. So with apples, it's the general range of rootstocks being used. There's a small amount of Geneva stocks here, but generally it's the mauling rootstocks that are forming the basis of the business. M9, M26, probably some 102, probably still a little bit of 106 around. The variety mix is more and more into managed varieties. There's quite a bit of Jazz and Envy grown here in Tasmania. Obviously Cripps Pink Lady still forms the main part of what people do, along with Gala. The local main organic supplier in Australia is here. They've chosen Kazuri as their managed variety, which is marketed as Morgana in Europe, but here in Australia it'll be called Southern Bliss. So there's definitely a progression to having a clear management strategy pathway to market for new products in the apple business. And I think that there's always a challenge about ensuring growers get an adequate return from the investment they make and the restrictions that they basically agree to in those systems. But I think it's still working okay, although there'll be year-to-year challenges. But yeah, generally people are making the investment on the back of understanding that they are going to have a clear pathway to make some money, because apples are much, much tighter when it comes to the margin. Australia is a closed market. Basically, we have a little bit of import from China, a little bit of import from New Zealand, but basically 97% of the product is produced and sold here in Australia. So it's a domestic market. Supply and demand sets the price. So if there's more apples than demand, then the price is down. If there's a little less, the price may go up a bit, but the parameters are that. So yeah, apples are much more challenging for the local growers. Whilst I'm not so close to the growing systems these days, generally we've been centilitre, reasonably intense, couple of thousand, 2,200 trees per hectare for a very long period of time. There are derivations on that, certainly in apples, where a little bit more of the open V, just to allow greater light capture. Still the same number of trees per hectare, but slightly different. Finish up with more, I guess, leaders in the system to produce fruit. Cherries, I've really had very little experience and only my observations, but the multi-leader tree has really been the pathway in Australia. Kim Green is a grower in South Australia, so the Kim Green bush was a derivation of Spanish bush. Those new fruiting wood being replaced as part of the strategy here for a lot of guys, but there is a bit more of the trellising and open V coming to cherries as well to increase the light interception, still with multiple leaders and multiple branches coming off the leaders for cropping. I first became involved with the IFTA in 1997. I went on the tour to Japan. Bruce Barrett ran a tour to Japan, and I guess I joined that year. Following year, I think I went to Pasco, and then I spoke. I actually made a presentation in Hamilton in 1999. And really the key driver for me in joining was I was sort of looking to add to the connections that I had in the business. I'd had my Churchill Fellowship in 1994. I'd travelled through North America and Europe. A number of those people were involved in the IDFTA as it was, so I wanted to maintain that. So I saw the meetings, the annual meetings, as being my pathway, I guess, to continue that. So I enjoyed the opportunity to meet with people, see new things. The variety world was still developing, so it was an interesting place to talk to people about what was happening. In 2004, Bruce Barrett talked to me about becoming director of the organisation. I think he had in the back of his mind, after running the meeting in New Zealand in 2000, which I went to, he wanted to have another international meeting somewhere, and he thought Tasmania would be good. So me looked like a likely character to be the person, to be a director that may be able to do that. So I joined at the end. I was invited to join. Ken Hall retired from his role, and I was kind of appointed to fill his vacancy for a period of time in November of 2004. So at that point, I was the first non-North American director of IFTA that only ever been directors from the USA and Canada previously. So that was a little bit of a something for me, a feather in my cap, I guess, to be recognised outside of North America. And I continued to attend meetings, engage with the board. There were a lot of things, I guess, we were talking about at the time. We'd had always an education director that, and then we had finished up with an executive officer. But we really needed a structure that was going to work for the organisation longer term. So we started talking to business management entities. Certainly by 2006, we met in Hershey. We gave up being dwarfs at that meeting and turned into just the IFTA, because I think most people agreed that Bob Carlson's vision of changing the system and using dwarfing rootstocks really had been realised, and now we were just in talking about the fruit tree industry. So we became the International Fruit Tree Association. We had a new logo, a new website, again, executive director in the role, but transitioned to the management company over the coming years. And I finished as a director in Pasco in 2011. And across that journey, I think we did go to Berlin. We met in Berlin, and that's the 3 times we've met outside of North America. I guess the organisation went through a period of saying, well, yeah, we've enjoyed travelling, we've enjoyed doing those things, but there are some risks, some business risks to the business. So we need to make sure we build our base and maintain it here within North America, which is where the most membership are. And I've continued to attend and go to meetings and still do the things that I would do. I think that the meeting agendas have always, in my mind, been about presentations where growers can come, attend, listen, look, visit with others, go out and see things, and take something home the next day that they can use on their farm. And I think through all of the time that I've been going to IFTA, it's been that. I think that's a real strength for the organisation to continue to build on. I think to some degree, we've really pushed hard to create a greater international base for the organisation outside of North America. Probably when I look back over time, we were successful for a period of time, but it takes a lot of energy to continue to engage that. And given that in the Southern Hemisphere, a meeting in the first or second week of February is peak harvest, you're not going to get many growers coming. There's still researchers and others involved, but that timing, I guess, makes it more difficult to have growers from the Southern Hemisphere attend, and even weather systems make it hard for people even in Europe to come across because of the constraints. So I think the organisation's kind of found its spot, but it probably doesn't quite have the same level of international engagement that it once did. Maybe that will change again, and it'll go through a cycle and it'll cycle back to that. So I think one of the things for about engagement for new people and wanting to be involved in something like IFTA, I've always said to growers that I've travelled in the new variety world, one thing you can be absolutely certain of, the new variety is not going to come and knock on your door. You're going to have to cross the road, and the road could be a long way away, or you're going to have to deal with somebody that is already engaged in that. So I encourage everybody that you need to get out and look. We're in an industry where you are relying on growing a product that probably many other people are growing, and systems, so you need to be able to learn how to do it the best to make sure your margin is the best for you so you can survive in the business. So I always encourage people to get engaged, and IFTA is a perfect opportunity for people to get engaged, come and see what's going on in the industry, meet other people, ideally learn a few things, ideally pass on a few things. Here we ran a young fruit growers group for a while, and there was a strong reticence for people to host other people to come to their farm because they were fearful that people might see something that they were doing wrong. And I've always marvelled at the IFTA growers that participate in the field tours, that they're not frightened to show the good, the bad and the ugly, and it's great that people will do that. And I think it's something that puts you in good stead if you're prepared to learn and also show people the mistakes that you may make. And I think IFTA provides a pathway for that.